The stench of rotting fish guts and coal smoke clung to everything in the Bowery. Lydia Hale pressed herself against the brick wall of the tenement, her empty stomach cramping, and watched the soup kitchen line snake around the corner. 200 people, maybe more. She'd been standing there since before dawn, and the sun was already climbing over the rooftops. "Move along if you ain't gonna queue proper," a man growled, shoving past her with an elbow that caught her ribs. She stumbled but kept her feet, kept her mouth shut. 3 months ago, she would have said something sharp, something her mother would have scolded her for. But her mother was dead now. Cholera had taken her in August, then her father in September, and by October the landlord had sold everything they owned to cover back rent. Now it was late November 1867, and Lydia was learning what it meant to be invisible. The line moved forward half a step. Someone behind her coughed, wet, rattling. She tucked her chin into the threadbare collar of her coat and tried not to breathe too deep. The last thing she needed was to get sick, not when she had maybe 1 week left before... Before what? She didn't let herself finish the thought. "You look half dead already, girl." Lydia's head snapped up. The woman beside her was maybe 40, maybe 60. Hard to tell under the grime and the hollow cheeks. She had kind eyes, though. That was dangerous. Kindness made you stupid. "I'm fine," Lydia said. "Sure you are." The woman shifted her weight, favoring her left leg. "You got people?" "No." "Work?" "Not anymore." The hat factory had let her go 3 weeks back. Too many girls, not enough orders. The foreman had looked genuinely sorry about it, which somehow made it worse. The woman nodded slowly, like Lydia had just confirmed something she'd already known. "You hear about the agency on Mulberry Street?" "What agency?" "Matrimonial service. Western men looking for wives." The woman's voice dropped lower. "Pays your passage out, sets you up with a husband, beats starving in the gutter." Lydia's throat tightened. She'd heard whispers about such places. Women who went west and were never heard from again. Women who ended up in brothels or worse. "I'll take my chances here," she said. The woman shrugged. "Suit yourself. But winter's coming, and this line's only getting longer." She pulled her shawl tighter. "Me? I already sent my letter. Leaving next month for California. Figure a bad husband's still better than a slow death in this cesspit." The line moved again. Lydia could smell the soup now. Thin, mostly water, but warm. Her stomach twisted painfully. "The agency," she heard herself say. "What's it called?" The Western Matrimonial Correspondence Agency occupied the second floor of a narrow building wedged between a butcher shop and a pawnbroker. Lydia stood across the street for 10 minutes before she finally crossed. The stairs creaked under her feet. At the top, a door with frosted glass and neat black lettering. WMCA. Respectable Arrangements for Respectable Ladies. She almost turned around. Instead, she knocked. "Come in." The office was smaller than she'd expected. Just one room with a desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets lining the walls. A woman sat behind the desk, maybe 35, wearing a blue dress with a cameo brooch at her throat. She looked up from her paperwork and smiled. "Good afternoon. I'm Mrs. Brennan. Please, sit." Lydia sat. Her hands were shaking, so she folded them in her lap. Mrs. Brennan set down her pen and studied her with sharp, evaluating eyes. Not unkind, but not soft either. "First time?" "Yes." "Name?" "Lydia Hale." "Age?" 22. "Can you read and write?" "Yes, my father was a bookkeeper. He made sure I had schooling." Something shifted in Mrs. Brennan's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "Good. That helps." She opened a drawer and pulled out a ledger. "I'll be frank with you, Miss Hale. This isn't a fairy tale service. The men who write to us are frontiersmen, ranchers, miners, hard men living hard lives. They need wives who can work, who can survive conditions most city girls can't even imagine. In return, they offer security, a home, and their name. Nothing more." "I understand." "Do you?" Mrs. Brennan leaned forward. "Because I've had girls come in here with romantic notions, thinking they'll step off the train into some grand adventure. Those girls don't last 6 months. They come back broken, or they don't come back at all." Lydia met her eyes. "I'm not looking for romance, Mrs. Brennan. I'm looking for a way to stay alive. A long pause. Then Mrs. Brennan nodded. All right then. She flipped through the ledger, running her finger down columns of names. We have several candidates currently seeking wives. Most are in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana territories. What kind of work can you do? I can sew, cook, basic meals. I kept house for my parents. I'm strong enough, I think. Any health problems? No. Religious objections to anything? Lydia blinked. Such as? Some men want large families. Others have been married before and have children who need tending. Some drink. Some don't hold with churches. Mrs. Brennan's pen was poised over paper. I need to know what you absolutely cannot tolerate. Violence, Lydia thought. Cruelty. Starvation. She'd already tolerated all of those. I can manage, she said quietly. Mrs. Brennan made a note. There's a fee for the service, $10, covers your rail passage and the arrangements. You'll pay it back from household money once you're settled. The marriage is legal and binding. If you run, you'll be pursued. If he mistreats you, you can appeal to local law, though I'll be honest, law out there is thin and unreliable. She looked up. Still interested? $10. Lydia had 80 cents to her name. I don't have the fee right now, she said. We'll deduct it from your first year. Most girls are in your situation. Mrs. Brennan turned to a different section of the ledger. Let me see who might suit. She ran her finger down the page, muttering under her breath. Thompson, no, he's too old. Gallagher wants a widow specifically. Morrison's place is too remote for a first-timer. She paused. Ah, here's one. Lydia's heart hammered. Ronan Cade, cattle rancher, Montana Territory, just north of a town called Birch Hollow. 31 years old. Owns his land outright, 500 acres. No children, no family obligations. He's been on our books for 4 months now. Why so long? Lydia asked. Mrs. Brennan's expression flickered. Just for a second, something uncertain crossed her face. Then it was gone. Mr. Cade is particular about his requirements. He needs someone practical, someone who won't ask too many questions. He's offering a fair arrangement. Separate living quarters initially, shared household expenses, legal marriage with protections for both parties. Separate quarters? He's not looking for affection, Miss Hale. He needs a partner to help run the property, someone to manage the domestic side while he handles the ranch. It's a business arrangement. Many of our placements are. Lydia tried to picture it. A ranch. Montana. A man named Ronan Cade who wanted a wife but not a wife. It should have sounded cold. Instead, it sounded like mercy. Has anyone else responded to him? Mrs. Brennan hesitated. 2 girls. Both withdrew their applications after receiving additional information about the placement. What information? Mr. Cade has a reputation in his community. There are rumors. Lydia's stomach dropped. What kind of rumors? The violent kind. Mrs. Brennan closed the ledger. I won't lie to you. The man has a past. He served in the war, came back different, they say. There have been incidents, altercations. He's known locally as someone you don't cross. Has he hurt women? Not to my knowledge. But he's hurt men, badly. Some say killed, though nothing's been proven. She folded her hands on the desk. I'm telling you this because I have to. But I'll also tell you this. In 4 months of correspondence, Ronan Cade has been nothing but straightforward. He doesn't drink. He doesn't gamble. He works hard and pays his debts. The ranch is profitable. You'd have food, shelter, safety from the elements. Just not necessarily safety from him if things went wrong. The room felt very small suddenly. Lydia thought about the soup line, the tenement stairs, the way the landlord had looked at her last week when she'd asked for more time. She thought about winter coming, about the girls who disappeared into the East River when the cold got bad enough. I'll take it, she said. Mrs. Brennan studied her for a long moment. You're sure? Yes. All right. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I'll send word to Mr. Cade today. If he agrees, and I expect he will, you'll leave on the 15th of December. That gives you 2 weeks to prepare. Bring practical clothes, nothing fancy, warm things. The territory gets bitter in winter. She began writing. Do you have questions? Lydia had 1,000 questions. She asked the only one that mattered. Will I be safe? Mrs. Brennan's pen paused. When she looked up, her eyes were kind but unflinching. I don't know, Miss Hale. I truly don't. But I do know you won't be safe here either. At least out there, you'll have a fighting chance. The train left from Grand Central on a gray morning that smelled like snow. Lydia stood on the platform with a carpet bag that held everything she owned. 2 dresses, 1 pair of good boots, her mother's Bible, and a daguerreotype of her parents taken on their wedding day. Mrs. Brennan had come to see her off. She pressed an envelope into Lydia's hands. Mr. Cade's response, she said. He's agreed to the arrangement. He'll meet you at the Birch Hollow station on the 22nd. Lydia turned the envelope over. Heavy paper, sealed with plain wax. Her name written in dark, angular script. Miss Lydia Hale. Did he say anything else? Only that you should dress warm. The journey's long, and the weather's turning. Mrs. Brennan squeezed her hand. Be smart out there. Trust your instincts. And remember, the marriage isn't final until you both sign before a proper witness. If something feels wrong when you arrive, you can refuse. We'll bring you back. Lydia nodded, though they both knew that was a lie. The ticket was one way. The debt was already accruing. There would be no coming back. Thank you, she said. Write to me, Mrs. Brennan said. Let me know how you fare. Then the conductor was calling, and Lydia was climbing aboard, and the train was pulling away from the platform in a cloud of steam and cinder smoke. She found a seat by the window and watched New York slide past. The endless brick, the factory smoke, the gray river churning with ice. Everything she'd ever known disappearing behind her. She didn't open the envelope until they were past Albany. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the same angular handwriting. Miss Hale, Mrs. Brennan has informed me of your acceptance. I will meet you at Birch Hollow Station on December 22nd, 4 o'clock train. Bring warm clothes and practical boots. The ranch is 10 miles north of town. We will marry immediately upon your arrival, as I need the arrangement legally binding before winter fully sets in. I am not an easy man. The work is hard and the land is harder. I require someone capable, not fragile. If you have doubts, turn back now. If you come, I will provide for you. You will have food, shelter, and protection. In return, I expect competence and discretion. We will maintain separate quarters until mutual agreement dictates otherwise. This is a contract, nothing more. Arcade Lydia read it 3 times. There was no warmth in it, no reassurance, just blunt facts delivered in blunt words. I am not an easy man. She folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. Outside, the landscape was changing. Fewer buildings, more trees, open spaces that seemed to stretch forever. First time west? Lydia glanced up. The woman across from her was maybe 50, round-faced, wearing a traveling suit that had seen better days. Yes, Lydia said. Me too. Going to visit my sister in Ohio. She married a railroad man. The woman smiled. You visiting family? No, I'm getting married. Oh, how lovely. Is he from out west? Montana Territory. The woman's eyebrows rose. That's quite far. You must be very much in love. Lydia looked back out the window. Something like that, he said. The journey took 6 days. The train rolled west through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois. The cities gave way to farmland, then prairie, then something wilder, endless grass and distant mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. Lydia spent most of the time by the window, watching America unspool before her. At night, she lay in her narrow sleeping berth and listened to the wheels clatter over the rails, carrying her farther and farther from everything familiar. On the 4th day, they crossed into the territories. The land changed again. Harder. Emptier. The grass turned brown and the sky seemed bigger, pressing down like a weight. Towns became smaller, farther between. The people who got on and off the train looked different too, weathered, quiet, carrying rifles like it was normal. On the 6th day, the conductor came through calling, "Birch Hollow! Next stop, Birch Hollow!" Lydia's heart lurched. She gathered her carpet bag, smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the window glass. She looked pale, tired, scared. She looked like exactly what she was, a desperate girl about to marry a stranger. The train slowed. Through the window, Lydia could see the town, if you could call it that. Maybe 20 buildings total, scattered along a wide dirt road. False front stores, a hotel, a church with a crooked steeple. Mountains rising in the distance, snow-capped and brutal. The train shuddered to a stop. Lydia stood. Her legs felt unsteady. "Good luck, dear," the round-faced woman said, smiling. Lydia managed a nod, then stepped into the aisle. The platform was just a strip of wooden planking beside the tracks. A handful of people waited. A man in a suit, two women in heavy coats, a boy with a mail sack. And standing apart from them, a man in a long canvas coat and a black hat pulled low. He was tall, well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered. He stood very still, hands loose at his sides, watching the train with an expression Lydia couldn't read from this distance. She knew immediately it was him. Something in her chest went cold. The conductor helped her down. Her boots hit the platform and her legs almost buckled. "Careful, miss," the conductor said. She steadied herself, gripped her carpet bag, looked up. Ronan Cade was walking toward her. Up close, he was even more imposing. Late 30s, maybe, though his face was hard to age, weathered, with lines around his eyes and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Dark hair, dark eyes. A jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once. He moved with an odd, deliberate precision, like every step was calculated. He stopped 3 feet away. "Miss Hale." His voice was low, rough. Not unkind, but not warm either. Flat, careful. "Mr. Cade," she managed. His eyes traveled over her, not leering, just assessing, taking inventory. She forced herself to stand straight, to meet his gaze. After a moment, he nodded. "You came. You sound surprised." "2 others didn't." He glanced at her carpet bag. "That all you brought?" "Yes." "Good. Means you listened." He turned toward the street. "Wagons this way. We'll see the minister first, then head to the ranch." Lydia's stomach clenched. "Now? Today?" He looked back at her. "I told you in the letter, marriage needs to be legal before winter fully sets. Snow's already starting in the high country." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Not cruelty, but not patience either. "You have an objection?" She thought about Mrs. Brennan's words. The marriage isn't final until you both sign before a proper witness. If something feels wrong when you arrive, you can refuse. This felt wrong. All of it felt wrong. But what was the alternative? Get back on the train? Go where? Back to New York with no money, no prospects, no hope? "No objection," she said quietly. Another nod. "Then let's get it done." He started walking. After a moment, Lydia followed. The wagon was a work vehicle, rough-built, meant for hauling supplies, not people. Ronan loaded her carpet bag into the back, then offered his hand to help her up. His grip was strong, calloused, careful not to squeeze too hard. She settled onto the bench seat. He climbed up beside her, took the reins. The wagon lurched into motion. They rode in silence through the town. Lydia tried not to stare, but she couldn't help it. Everything was so different from New York, wooden buildings instead of brick, dirt streets instead of cobblestones, open sky instead of the endless press of humanity. People watched them pass. A woman sweeping a porch, 2 men outside the general store, a group of children playing in the street. Their eyes followed Ronan with a mix of wariness and something else. Fear, maybe. Or respect born from fear. No one waved. No one called out a greeting. "They don't like you much," Lydia said before she could stop herself. Ronan's jaw tightened. "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't let them push me around." He guided the wagon around a rut in the road. "And because I've made examples of men who tried." The casual way he said it sent a chill down her spine. "What kind of examples?" He glanced at her. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the shadow of his hat. "The kind that make people think twice." He didn't elaborate. Lydia didn't ask. The church was at the far end of town, small, white-painted, with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left. Ronan pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. This time, Lydia got down on her own. Inside, the church was dim and cold. A thin man in a black suit stood near the altar, holding a prayer book. He looked up when they entered, and his expression shifted, surprise, then discomfort. "Ronan," he said carefully. "Reverend?" Ronan removed his hat. "This is Lydia Hale. We're here to marry." The Reverend's gaze moved to Lydia. She saw pity flicker across his face, quickly hidden. "I see. Miss Hale, have you—" Do you understand the commitment you're making? She understands, Ronan said flatly. I'd like to hear it from her. Lydia lifted her chin. I understand, Reverend. I'm here of my own will. The Reverend hesitated, then nodded slowly. Very well. Do you have a witness? No. I'll fetch Mrs. Yates from next door. He set down the prayer book. Wait here. He left through a side door. Lydia and Ronan stood in the quiet church, 3 feet apart, not looking at each other. You can still leave, Ronan said suddenly. Lydia turned. He was staring at the altar, his hat in his hands. If you want to go back, I'll pay your passage. No debt owed. She studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the scar, the tension in his shoulders. Why? She asked. Because once we do this, it's binding. You'll be tied to me, and that's not… He stopped, drew a breath. It's not a kindness. I'm not looking for kindness. I'm looking to survive. He turned to face her then, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression, something almost human. You might not survive me, he said quietly. Lydia's pulse hammered. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she thought about the soup line, the tenement stairs, the landlord's eyes. I'll take my chances, she said. The Reverend returned with a gray-haired woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Yates, the minister's wife. She gave Lydia a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The ceremony was brief, clinical. The Reverend read from his prayer book in a monotone voice. There were no flowers, no music, no gathered friends, just 4 people in a cold church on a December afternoon. Do you, Ronan Cade, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Lydia Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Lydia's throat was dry. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you man and wife. The Reverend closed his book. You may sign the register. They signed. Mrs. Yates witnessed. The Reverend stamped the document with a seal. And just like that, Lydia Hale became Lydia Cade. Congratulations, the Reverend said, though he didn't sound like he meant it. Ronan put his hat back on. Thank you, Reverend. He turned to Lydia. We should go. Storm's coming. Outside, the sky had darkened. Heavy clouds were rolling in from the north, and the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of snow. Ronan helped her into the wagon again, then climbed up and took the reins. As they pulled away from the church, Lydia looked back and saw Mrs. Yates standing in the doorway, watching them leave with an expression that might have been sorrow. The ranch was north of town, just like Ronan had said. 10 miles of rough road that climbed into the foothills, winding through stands of pine and open meadow. The farther they got from Birch Hollow, the quieter it became. Just the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harness, the wind in the trees. Snow started falling halfway there. Big fat flakes that melted on Lydia's coat. How much farther? She asked. Another mile. She pulled her coat tighter. The temperature was dropping fast. Her fingers were already going numb. Ronan glanced at her, then reached behind the bench seat and pulled out a heavy wool blanket. He handed it to her without a word. Thank you, she said. He just nodded and kept driving. The ranch appeared over a rise, a collection of buildings clustered in a shallow valley. The main house was log-built, single-story, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it stood a barn, a corral, a smokehouse, and what looked like a bunkhouse. It was isolated, starkly, utterly isolated. No other houses in sight, just wilderness pressing in from all sides. Ronan pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down. Lydia followed, her legs stiff from the cold. Main house is through here, he said, starting up the porch steps. Kitchen, sitting room, 2 bedrooms. You'll take the larger room. It's warmer. Mine's in the back. He opened the door. Inside was dark and cold. Ronan moved through the space with practiced efficiency, lighting lamps, stirring the coals in the stove. Slowly, the room came into focus. It was sparse but clean. A table and chairs, a cast-iron stove. Shelves lined with supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, canned goods. The furniture was handmade, sturdy. Everything had the feel of careful maintenance, nothing wasted. Your room's here. Ronan opened a door off the main room. Inside was a bed, a dresser, a washstand. A small window looked out toward the mountains. Lydia stepped inside. The air smelled like pine and cold stone. I'll bring your bag in, Ronan said. There's water in the pitcher, though it'll be cold. I'll heat some on the stove if you want to wash. Thank you. He paused in the doorway, and for a moment they just stood there, strangers bound by paper and law. I meant what I said in the letter, he said finally. This is a contract. I won't touch you unless you agree to it. Your door has a lock. Use it if you want. Lydia's throat tightened. And if I do? Then you do. His expression was unreadable. I'm not that kind of man. He left before she could respond. Lydia sank onto the edge of the bed and stared at the bare walls. She'd done it. Married a stranger, traveled 2,000 miles, committed herself to a life she couldn't even imagine. From the other room, she heard Ronan moving around. The scrape of a chair, the clatter of the stove door opening. Normal sounds. Domestic sounds. But nothing about this felt normal. She thought about the way the townspeople had looked at him. The Reverend's pity. Mrs. Brennan's warning, the man has a past. What had she gotten herself into? Outside, the snow was falling harder now, erasing the world in white. That first night, they ate in silence. Ronan cooked. Bacon, beans, bread that was only a little stale. He moved around the kitchen with quiet competence, no wasted motion. He set her plate in front of her, then took his own seat across the table. Thank you, Lydia said. He nodded and started eating. Lydia tried to eat too, but her stomach was twisted in knots. The food sat heavy in her mouth. She forced herself to swallow anyway. She couldn't afford to waste it. You cook? Ronan asked suddenly. Some. Basic things. That's fine, I'm not particular. He took a drink of water. Mornings, I'm up before dawn. I'll start the stove and put coffee on. You don't have to be up that early unless you want. What do you do? In the mornings? Tend the stock, check fences, whatever needs doing. He paused. Winter's the slow season. Most of the work is just keeping things alive until spring. Lydia nodded. What do you need me to do? He studied her across the table. Can you shoot? No. I'll teach you. Out here, you need to know how. He pushed his plate away. Otherwise, just keep the house. Cook when you're able. Mend what needs mending. I'm not expecting miracles. What if I can't do it? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then you'll learn. Same as everyone else who came out here. His voice wasn't harsh, just matter of fact. This land doesn't care if you're ready. It'll take you down either way. But if you're smart and you don't quit, you'll figure it out. He stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. Lydia watched him move through the lamplight. This stranger she'd married, this man everyone feared. He didn't look cruel, just tired, worn down by something she couldn't name. Why did you want a wife? She asked. He glanced back at her. Need, not want. There's a difference. What do you need one for? Because running this place alone is killing me. He said it flatly, like stating a fact. I need someone who can handle the domestic side so I can focus on keeping us fed. And... He stopped. And what? His jaw worked. And I'm tired of being alone. The honesty of it caught her off guard. I'm not good company, she said quietly. Neither am I. He dried his hands on a towel. Maybe we'll balance out. He left the kitchen then, disappeared into his room at the back of the house. A moment later, she heard the door close. Lydia sat alone at the table, surrounded by lamplight and silence, and wondered if this was what her life would be now. Quiet, separate, two people existing in the same space but never quite touching. She washed her plate, banked the stove, and went to her room. The bed was softer than she'd expected. The blankets were clean and smelled like cedar. Through the window she could see snow falling thick and fast, already covering the ground. She lay down fully clothed, too exhausted to do anything else. Sleep came in pieces, restless, full of strange dreams, trains and churches and dark-eyed men. Her mother's voice calling her name, the sound of wind against the windows. Sometime deep in the night, she woke to a noise. Lydia lay very still, listening. There it was again, a low, rough sound from the other side of the house. Rhythmic, pained. She rose quietly, crossed to her door and eased it open. The main room was dark except for the dying glow of the stove. She stood there, barely breathing, and listened. The sound came again. Ronan's voice, low and broken, speaking words she couldn't make out. Then silence. Then another ragged breath that might have been a sob. A nightmare, she realized. He was having a nightmare. She should go back to bed. It wasn't her business. They'd agreed to separate lives, but something about the sound, the raw anguish in it, made her hesitate. She crossed the room to his door, pressed her hand against the wood. "Mr. Cade?" she said softly. The sound stopped. A long silence. Then, "Go back to bed." His voice was hoarse, wrecked. "Are you all right?" I said go back to bed, too. There was an edge to it now, not anger, but warning. The same way you'd warn someone away from a cornered animal. Lydia stepped back from the door, returned to her room, closed the door and locked it, like he'd told her to. She lay awake for a long time after that, listening to the wind howl and wondering what kind of dreams could break a man like Ronan Cade. Morning came with this kind of cold that hurt to breathe. Lydia woke to gray light seeping through the window and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. She lay there for a moment, disoriented, until the events of yesterday came flooding back. She was married. She was in Montana. She was sharing a house with a man who had nightmares that sounded like dying. She forced herself out of bed. Her breath misted in the air. The room had gone ice cold overnight. She dressed quickly, layering everything she had, and ventured into the main room. Ronan was already at the table, bent over a cup of coffee, studying what looked like a map. He glanced up when she entered. "Coffee's on the stove," he said. His voice was rough but steady, no trace of last night's brokenness. His eyes were shadowed, though, like he hadn't slept much after. "Thank you." She poured herself a cup and wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth. They stood in silence. Outside, the world was buried under 8 inches of fresh snow, brilliant white under a pale sun. "Storm passed," Ronan said. "I need to check the herd today, make sure none got caught out in the open." "How many do you have?" "About 200 head. Most are in the low pasture, but some of the younger stock wander." He folded the map. "I'll be gone most of the day. There's food in the stores. Help yourself. Don't go outside without good reason. Temperature's dropping, and it's easy to get turned around in snow like this." "I'll stay inside." He nodded and stood, draining his coffee. He moved to the door, shrugged into a heavy coat, and pulled on gloves. Then he paused. "Lock the door behind me," he said. "Why?" "Because I'm telling you to." There was no room for argument in his tone. Lydia set down her cup. "Is there something I should be worried about?" "Always." He settled his hat on his head. "Out here, you worry about everything, or you die stupid." He left before she could respond. She watched through the window as he crossed the yard to the barn, moving with that same deliberate precision. A few minutes later, he emerged on horseback, a rifle in a saddle scabbard, and rode north toward the tree line. Lydia locked the door. The day stretched out empty and strange. She explored the house properly, looking through cupboards, taking inventory. Ronan kept things organized with an almost military efficiency. Every item had a place. Nothing was wasted or left to clutter. In the kitchen, she found flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, coffee, a few precious jars of preserves, onions and potatoes stored in a root cellar beneath a trapdoor, smoked meat hanging in the cold room. It was more food than she'd seen in months, and the sight of it made her throat tight. She checked the other rooms. The sitting area had a chair, a small bookshelf with maybe a dozen books, practical volumes mostly, animal husbandry and veterinary guides, one book of poetry so worn the cover was nearly illegible. The walls were bare except for a single photograph in a simple frame, 3 men in Union uniforms, young and unsmiling. Ronan was on the left, barely recognizable, his face fuller, unmarked by the scar, his eyes holding something that might have been hope. She wondered what had happened to the other 2 men, wondered if Ronan ever looked at this photograph, or if he'd just forgotten it was there. Her own room yielded little, just the furniture and an empty wardrobe that smelled like cedar. She unpacked her carpet bag, hanging her spare dress, setting her mother's Bible on the dresser beside the daguerreotype. Her parents stared back at her from the photograph, frozen in time. Young, together. Full of plans that had all ended in a tenement room stinking of sickness. Lydia turned the photograph face down and went back to the kitchen. She needed to be useful. That was the arrangement. So she set about making bread, working the dough with hands that were clumsy from cold and unfamiliarity with Ronan's kitchen. The rhythm of it was soothing, though, something her mother had taught her, something that felt like home. By the time the bread was rising, the sun was past noon. Lydia stood at the window and looked out across the snowy expanse. No sign of Ronan, just white emptiness and the dark line of trees in the distance. The silence was absolute. No street vendors calling, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no church bells or factory whistles. Just wind and the occasional crack of a branch breaking under snow weight. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like the world had been erased. She was checking the bread when she heard hoofbeats. Her heart jumped. She moved to the window and saw Ronan riding in, but something was wrong. He was slumped forward in the saddle, and the horse was moving slower than it should. Lydia grabbed her coat and unlocked the door. The cold hit her like a fist. She stumbled down the porch steps just as Ronan dismounted, or tried to. He got one leg over and then his knee buckled. He caught himself against the horse's flank, breathing hard. What happened? Lydia rushed forward. Nothing. I'm fine. He was not fine. His face was gray and his left hand was pressed against his side. You're hurt. Just bruised. He tried to straighten up and winced. Horse spooked, threw me into a fence post, knocked the wind out, that's all. Let me see. I said I'm fine, and I said, let me see. She reached for his coat. He caught her wrist. Not rough, but firm. His eyes locked on hers. I can handle it, he said quietly. Can you? She didn't pull away. Because from where I'm standing, you look like you're about to fall over. A muscle worked in his jaw. Then slowly he released her wrist. Inside, he said. She helped him into the house, which was harder than it should have been because he wouldn't lean on her, wouldn't admit he needed the support. By the time they got him to a chair, he was breathing in short, careful gasps. Coat off, Lydia said. He shrugged out of it, moving like every motion hurt. Underneath, his shirt was torn on the left side, and blood had soaked through the fabric. That's not a bruise, Lydia said. Fence post had a nail sticking out. Caught me when I went down. Take your shirt off. It's not that bad. Take it off or I'll cut it off. He stared at her. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. Then he started unbuttoning his shirt. The wound was a jagged tear just below his ribs, maybe 3 inches long. Not deep enough to be fatal, but deep enough to bleed freely. The skin around it was already purpling with bruise. Lydia's stomach turned, but she kept her face neutral. I need to clean this. Do you have medical supplies? Cabinet by the door. Whiskey's under the sink. She gathered what she could find. Clean cloth, a needle, and thread. A bottle of whiskey that was half empty. When she came back, Ronan was leaning back in the chair, eyes closed, jaw clenched. This is gonna hurt, she said. I know. She poured whiskey over the wound. Ronan's whole body went rigid. He didn't make a sound, but his hands gripped the chair arms so hard she heard the wood creak. Sorry, she whispered. Just finish it. She worked as quickly as she could, cleaning the wound, checking for debris. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady. She'd never done anything like this before, but she'd watched her mother tend her father's injuries from the factory. The principle was the same. Clean it, close it, keep it from festering. I need to stitch it, she said. Ronan opened his eyes. You know how? I can sew a hem. Can't be that different. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Go ahead then. Threading the needle took 3 tries. Her hands were shaking worse now. But once she started, muscle memory took over. Small, even stitches, just like hemming a dress. Except instead of fabric, it was skin, and instead of thread, it was catgut, and every time the needle went through, Ronan's breathing hitched. Talk to me, he said suddenly. She glanced up. His face was pale, slick with sweat. About what? Anything. Just talk. Lydia bent back to her work, trying to think of something to say. I grew up in New York, Lower East Side. My father kept books for a textile company. What happened to him? Cholera? Last summer. My mother went first, then him 2 weeks later. I'm sorry. Are you? She tied off another stitch. Or are you just saying what you're supposed to? I don't say things I don't mean. She believed him. There was something about the way he spoke, blunt, stripped of social nicety, that felt like truth. What about you? She asked. Where are you from? Pennsylvania, little town outside Pittsburgh. Left when I was 17. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I was tired of working in the mills and dying slow. Figured I'd go west and die fast instead. That's a bleak choice. It was an honest one. She finished the last stitch and tied it off. The wound was closed, the bleeding stopped. She pressed a clean cloth over it and wrapped it tight with strips of fabric. Done, she said. Ronan looked down at her work. Not bad. You might have missed your calling. I'll stick to sewing dresses, thanks. He almost smiled again. Then he tried to stand and his face went white. Easy. She put a hand on his shoulder. You need to rest. Can't. Still have to tend the horse, check the stock in the barn. I'll do it. He shook his head. You don't know how. Then tell me. They stared at each other. Lydia could see him trying to decide if she was serious, if she was capable. Finally, he sighed. All right. Horse needs unsaddling, rub down, feed, and water. There's grain in the barrel by the stalls. Make sure she's dry before you blanket her. What else? Check the 2 cows in the barn. Make sure they have hay and water. Don't go in the stall with the bull. He's temperamental. Anything else? Yeah. Don't get yourself killed. I'm in no shape to bury you. Lydia pulled on her coat. I'll try to restrain myself. Outside, the cold was vicious. The sun was already sinking toward the mountains, and the temperature was dropping fast. Lydia crossed the yard to the barn, her boots crunching through snow. The barn was warmer, insulated by animal heat and straw. The horse was still saddled, standing in the center aisle, breath steaming. She looked at Lydia with dark, patient eyes. All right, Lydia said. Let's figure this out. Unsaddling took longer than it should have. The buckles were stiff and her fingers were clumsy, but she managed it eventually, hefting the saddle onto a rack the way she'd seen Ronan do it. Then she found a brush and started working on the horse's coat. The mare stood quietly, accepting the attention. Up close she was beautiful, deep bay with a white blaze down her face. Her warmth was comforting in the cold barn. What's your name? Lydia asked. The horse snorted. Very helpful. She finished brushing, measured out grain, filled the water bucket. The 2 cows were easy. They just needed hay thrown over the stall door and fresh water. The bull watched her from his pen with baleful yellow eyes, but he didn't charge. By the time she finished, full dark had fallen. She locked the barn and trudged back to the house, her face numb, her fingers aching. Inside, Ronan was exactly where she'd left him, slumped in the chair. But the lamp was lit, and he'd managed to pull a shirt on, carefully, judging by the way he was breathing. Everything all right? He asked. Still standing. She peeled off her coat. The horse is settled. Cows are fed. The bull looked at me like he wanted to murder me, but he stayed in his pen. That's Brutus. He looks at everyone like that. You named your bull Brutus? Seemed fitting. He shifted carefully in the chair. Thank you for handling it. Lydia shrugged. That's the arrangement, isn't it? I manage the domestic side. Livestock isn't domestic. It is when it's in a barn. She moved to the stove, checking the bread she'd left rising. It had doubled in size, ready to bake. Are you hungry? Some. She put the bread in to bake and started heating beans and the last of the bacon. They ate in silence again, but this time it felt different. Less like 2 strangers forced together and more like, she wasn't sure what. Something quieter, almost companionable. After dinner, Ronan tried to clean up and nearly fell. Lydia pushed him toward his room. Go to bed before you tear those stitches open. I'm fine. You keep saying that. It's not getting more convincing. She took the plate from his hands. Go. He went. Lydia cleaned up, banked the stove, and retreated to her own room. She lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, thinking about the way Ronan's hands had gripped the chair while she stitched him up, the way he'd tried to thank her, awkward and sincere. He wasn't what she'd expected. Not gentle, but not cruel either, just blunt, practical. Shaped by a life that didn't allow for softness. She could work with that, she thought. Sleep came easier that night. No nightmares woke her, and if Ronan had any, she didn't hear them. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Ronan's wound healed slowly, forcing him to move carefully, to accept help he clearly hated needing. Lydia learned the routines of the ranch, feeding stock, hauling water, keeping the stove going. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done in the city, but there was a strange satisfaction in it. She learned other things, too. Ronan woke before dawn every day, no matter how much pain he was in. He drank his coffee black and hot enough to scald. He read in the evenings sometimes, the book of poetry she'd noticed, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the verses. He never talked about the war, but sometimes his hand would drift to the scar on his eyebrow, tracing it absently. And the nightmares continued. Most nights she heard him, low, broken sounds from the other side of the house. She never went to his door again. Whatever he fought in his sleep was his business, but it wore on him. She could see it in the shadows under his eyes, the careful way he held himself, like he was always braced for something. 2 weeks after her arrival, the weather cleared enough for a trip to town. Ronan announced it over breakfast. "Need supplies," he said. "Flour's running low, and we need more lamp oil. You should come. Let people see you're alive." Lydia's stomach tightened. "Do I have to?" "No, but it'll stop the gossip faster if they see us together." "What kind of gossip?" He looked at her over his coffee cup. "The kind where they wonder if I've killed you yet and buried you in the snow." She couldn't tell if he was joking. "Fine," she said. "I'll come." They took the wagon into town under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The snow had melted in patches, leaving the road muddy and rutted. Ronan drove in silence, his face closed off, and Lydia watched the landscape roll past. Birch Hollow looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier. They pulled up outside the general store, and immediately Lydia felt eyes on them. People stopped mid-conversation to stare. A woman clutched her daughter's hand and pulled her back from the boardwalk. "Ignore them," Ronan said quietly. Inside the store, the shopkeeper, a thin man with nervous hands, looked up from his ledger and went pale. "Ronan, didn't expect you today." "Need supplies, Garrett." Ronan pulled a list from his pocket. "Flour, lamp oil, salt, coffee, whatever else you've got fresh." Garrett took the list with shaking fingers. Sure thing. I'll get this together." He disappeared into the back. Ronan leaned against the counter, perfectly relaxed, but Lydia could feel the tension radiating off him. "Does everyone react to you like this?" she asked quietly. "Most." "Why?" "Because I put Frank Morrison's son in the ground last spring." The words dropped like stones. Lydia stared at him. "You killed someone?" "He drew on me first, tried to shoot me in the back over a property dispute." Ronan's voice was flat. "So yeah, I killed him. And the law?" "Sheriff ruled it self-defense. Frank didn't agree. We've had trouble since." Garrett emerged with an armload of supplies, and the conversation died. They loaded the wagon in silence. As they were finishing, a voice called out, "Well now, if it isn't the happy couple." Lydia turned. A man was walking toward them, mid-50s, well-dressed in a way that stood out in this rough town. He had the look of someone used to being important. Behind him trailed 2 younger men, ranch hands by the look of them. Ronan's whole body went still. "Frank," he said. Frank Morrison smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Heard you got yourself a mail-order bride." Didn't believe it till now. His gaze slid to Lydia, assessing and dismissive. "Poor thing. Did they tell you what you were signing up for?" "She knows," Ronan said. "Does she? Does she know you're a murderer? That you shot my boy in cold blood, and the sheriff let you walk because he's too scared to do his job?" Lydia's pulse hammered. People were gathering now, watching from doorways and windows. "Your boy tried to kill me," Ronan said quietly. "You know that. The whole town knows that." "What I know is you took my son from me." Frank stepped closer. "And one day, Cade, you're going to pay for it." The threat hung in the air. Ronan didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, hands loose at his sides, watching Frank with dark, unreadable eyes. "We done here?" he asked. Frank smiled again. "For now." His gaze flicked to Lydia. "You watch yourself, Mrs. Cade. Dangerous things happen around your husband." He walked away, his men following. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in low murmurs. Ronan climbed into the wagon. "Let's go." Lydia got up beside him, her hands shaking. "That man runs the biggest ranch in the territory, has more money than sense and a grudge he won't let die." Ronan snapped the reins. "Forget about him. He threatened you. He's been threatening me for months. It's just talk. What if it's not? Ronan glanced at her. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. You worried about me? I'm worried about me. If something happens to you, I'm stuck here alone with no way to survive. It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth, but Ronan accepted it with a nod. Fair enough, he said. They drove back to the ranch in silence, but Lydia couldn't stop thinking about the way Frank Morrison had looked at Ronan, like he was planning something, like the threats weren't just talk, and she couldn't stop thinking about Ronan's words in the store. I put Frank Morrison's son in the ground. She'd married a killer. Everyone had warned her, and now she was living under the same roof, eating at the same table, existing in the strange, careful orbit of a man who'd taken a life and didn't seem particularly troubled by it. That night she locked her door, but lying in the dark, listening to the wind, she found herself wondering, if Ronan was really dangerous, would he have let Frank Morrison walk away? Would he have stitched himself up in silence rather than ask for help? Would he wake up screaming from dreams that clearly haunted him? She didn't know. And that uncertainty was worse than fear. The answer came 3 days later. Lydia was in the kitchen kneading dough when she heard riders. She looked out the window and saw 3 men on horseback, approaching fast. Her stomach dropped. Ronan! He emerged from the barn, saw the riders, and his whole posture changed. He moved to the porch, and Lydia saw him reach for something behind the door. A rifle. The riders pulled up in the yard. Ranch hands. 2 of them had been with Frank Morrison in town. Cade, the lead rider said, Mr. Morrison sent us. Says you've got cattle on his land. I don't. He says you do. Says he's tired of you pushing boundaries. Ronan's voice went cold. My cattle are on my land. Frank knows that. He's looking for an excuse. Well, he's got one now. The rider leaned forward in his saddle. He wants you to come settle this, face to face, today. Tell Frank if he's got a problem, he can ride up here himself. The rider smiled. He figured you'd say that. Said to give you a message. His hand moved to his belt. Ronan brought the rifle up in one smooth motion. Don't. The rider froze. The world seemed to stop. 3 men on horses, 1 man on a porch with a rifle, and Lydia watching from the window with her heart in her throat. Just a letter, the rider said slowly. He pulled an envelope from his belt, carefully, deliberately, and tossed it onto the ground. From Mr. Morrison, he said to make sure you read it. He backed his horse up. The other 2 followed. They turned and rode away at a gallop, leaving nothing but the envelope lying in the dirt. Ronan lowered the rifle. Lydia stepped outside. What was that? He didn't answer, just walked down the steps and picked up the envelope. He tore it open, read the contents, and his face went blank. What does it say? Lydia asked. He handed it to her without a word. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. Cade. You took my son. I'm taking what you value. Stay off my land or your wife pays the price. This is your only warning. F. Morrison. Lydia's hands went numb. He's threatening me? Yes. Because of you? Yes. Ronan took the letter back, crumpled it. He wants me to come after him, wants an excuse to finish this. So what do we do? Ronan looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Not anger. Fear. We make sure you're never alone, he said. That afternoon, Ronan taught her how to shoot. They went out behind the barn where a row of tin cans sat on fence posts. The cold bit through Lydia's coat, but she barely felt it. Her mind was still on the letter, on Frank Morrison's threat, on the casual way those riders had delivered it. Ronan handed her a revolver. It was heavier than she expected. This is a Colt, he said. 6 rounds. You hold it like this. He demonstrated, his hands steady. Both hands if you can. Sight down the barrel. Breathe out when you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Lydia tried to mirror his grip. Her hands were shaking. I can't do this. You can. You just haven't yet. He stepped behind her, adjusted her stance. Feet shoulder width. Bend your knees a little. You're too stiff. His voice was patient, almost gentle. It was strange hearing that tone from him. Now aim at the can on the left. Take your time. Lydia sighted down the barrel. The can seemed impossibly far away. She squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked hard. The shot went wide, hitting dirt 6 feet from the target. Again, Ronan said. She fired 5 more times. Missed every shot. By the end, her ears were ringing and her hands ached from the recoil. I'm terrible at this. You've never done it before. Give yourself more than 5 minutes. He reloaded the revolver. Try again. This time, don't anticipate the kick. Just squeeze smooth. They spent an hour out there. By the end, Lydia had managed to hit 1 can, barely clipped it, but it counted. Ronan nodded approval. Better. Keep practicing. Every day until it feels natural. Will it ever feel natural? He looked at her, and something in his eyes was old and tired. I hope not. The day it feels natural is the day you've seen too much. They walked back to the house in silence. Inside, Ronan pulled out a second revolver from a locked drawer and set it on the table. This one's yours now. Keep it loaded. Keep it close. Even inside. Especially inside. He met her eyes. Frank's serious. He's been wanting an excuse to come at me, and now he thinks he's found one. If his men show up and I'm not here, you shoot first and ask questions after. Understand? Lydia's throat was tight. I understand. That night, she didn't lock her door. She left it open a crack, the revolver on the bedside table, and lay awake listening to every creak and groan of the house settling. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Once, she heard what might have been hoofbeats and sat bolt upright, heart hammering, before realizing it was just branches scraping the roof. When she finally slept, her dreams were full of men on horses and guns that wouldn't fire. The next week passed in a state of constant tension. Ronan rarely left her alone, and when he did, it was never for long. He moved through the ranch work with grim efficiency, always keeping the house in sight. Lydia practiced shooting every afternoon until her hands were steady and she could hit the cans more often than not. They didn't talk about Frank Morrison. But the threat hung over everything like weather about to break. On the 8th day, Lydia was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard something from the direction of the north pasture. Not hoofbeats. Something else. She stopped, hands full of wet sheets, and listened. There it was again. A low, distressed sound. Cattle. She dropped the laundry and ran to find Ronan. He was in the barn, repairing a broken stall door. Something's wrong with the herd, she said. He was on his feet immediately. Where? North pasture. I heard them. He grabbed his rifle and they went together, moving fast through the snow. As they got closer, Lydia could see the problem. The fence was down, not broken by weather, but cut. Clean cuts through the wire. And beyond it, maybe 30 head of cattle were gone, their tracks heading west toward Morrison land. Ronan stood very still, looking at the cut fence. He's stealing from you, Lydia said. He's baiting me. Ronan's voice was flat. Wants me to come after them. Wants me to cross onto his property so he can claim I'm the aggressor. So what do? We go to the sheriff. The ride into town was tense and silent. Ronan drove the wagon hard, and Lydia held on as they jolted over frozen ruts. When they reached Birch Hollow, he pulled up outside a small building with Sheriff painted on the window. Inside, a man sat behind a desk, feet propped up, reading a newspaper. He was maybe 40, with a soft middle and softer eyes. He looked up when they entered, and his expression went carefully neutral. Ronan. Sheriff Blake. Ronan's tone was clipped. Frank Morrison's men cut my fence and drove off 30 head. I want it on record. Blake set down his paper slowly. You got proof it was Morrison's men? Tracks lead straight to his property. Fence was cut with wire snips, not weather damage. Could have been anyone. Could have been rustlers passing through. It was Morrison, and you know it. Blake stood, but he didn't move from behind his desk. What do you want me to do, Ronan? Ride up to the biggest ranch in the territory and accuse Frank Morrison of theft based on tracks in the snow? That's your job. My job is keeping the peace, and the peace means not starting a range war over some missing cattle. Ronan's hands flexed. He threatened my wife. Now he's stolen my stock. How much more are you going to let him get away with? I haven't seen proof of any threats. I have the letter. He sent riders to my property with a written threat against Lydia. Blake's eyes flicked to Lydia, then back to Ronan. Bring me the letter. I'll look into it. You'll look into it, Ronan repeated. His voice was deadly quiet. That's all you're going to do. That's all I can do without proof. Ronan turned and walked out. Lydia followed, her stomach churning. Outside, he stood by the wagon, breathing hard, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "He's not going to help," she said. "No, he's scared of Morrison. Most people are." Ronan climbed into the wagon. "We're on our own." They drove back in silence. But when they were halfway home, Ronan pulled the wagon off the road and stopped. "What are you doing?" Lydia asked. He sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. Then he turned to her. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her stomach drop. "All right." "Frank Morrison isn't going to stop. He wants me dead, and he's going to keep pushing until he gets what he wants. That means you're in danger as long as you're with me." "I know that." "I don't think you do." He looked at her directly, and she saw something raw in his eyes. "I've killed men, Lydia. The stories you've heard about me, most of them are true. I'm not a good man. I'm not safe to be around. And if you stay here, there's a real chance you'll end up dead because of me." Lydia's hands were cold despite her gloves. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm giving you a choice. I can take you back to town right now, put you on the next train east, give you enough money to get settled somewhere. You don't owe me anything. We're married. On paper. Doesn't mean you're stuck." His voice was rough. "I won't hold you to a contract that might get you killed." The wind picked up, rattling through bare branches. Lydia thought about New York, about the soup lines and the tenement stairs, about the cold and the hunger and the endless grinding weight of just trying to survive. Then she thought about the last 2 weeks, learning to shoot, stitching up Ronan's side, the quiet evenings by the stove, the strange, fragile thing that had started to grow between them. Not love, not even friendship, really, but something like partnership. "I'm not leaving," she said. Ronan stared at her. "You should." "Maybe, but I'm not." She met his eyes. "You think I don't know what I signed up for? You think I came out here expecting safety? I came here to survive, and that's what I'm doing. With you, not running from you. Even if it gets you killed? Even then, at least I'll die fighting instead of starving in a gutter." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but close to it. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said. "Probably both." He almost smiled. Then he picked up the reins and they continued home. That night, Lydia didn't sleep. She lay in bed with the revolver next to her pillow and listened to the house. Around midnight, she heard Ronan moving around in his room, pacing, then silence, then more pacing. She got up, pulled on her coat, and knocked on his door. "What?" His voice was sharp. "Can't sleep either?" A pause. Then the door opened. Ronan stood there in shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, looking like he'd been running his hands through it. "What do you want?" he asked, but there was no real hostility in it. "To not be alone with my thoughts." She looked past him into his room. It was sparse like hers, just a bed, a dresser, a chair. The book of poetry lay open on the bedside table. "Can we sit? In the main room?" He studied her for a moment, then nodded. They sat at the kitchen table. Ronan poured coffee, old and bitter, but warm. They drank in silence for a while. "Tell me about the war," Lydia said finally. "No." "Why not?" "Because it's not something you need to hear. I'm going to be fighting beside you if Morrison comes. Don't you think I should know what I'm dealing with?" Ronan's fingers tightened on his cup. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low. "I enlisted in 61. Thought I was doing something noble. By 63, I knew better. There's nothing noble about watching men you grew up with die screaming in the mud. Nothing noble about killing boys who look just like you because someone told you to." "The photograph," Lydia said. "In the sitting room. The other 2 men? Dead. Both of them. Thomas took a bullet at Gettysburg. Michael died of dysentery 2 months before Appomattox." He stared into his coffee. "I was the only one who made it home. And when I got back, I couldn't be around people anymore. Couldn't stand the noise, the crowds, the way everyone acted like nothing had changed when everything had. So you came west." "So I came west, bought this land with my mustering out pay, and figured I'd live quiet, keep to myself, not hurt anyone." His laugh was bitter. "Didn't work out that way." "What happened with Morrison's son?" Ronan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. Jack Morrison was 23. Drunk, angry, thought he was invincible because his daddy owned half the territory. He came to my property claiming I'd stolen water rights. I told him to leave. He drew on me. Ronan's voice went flat. I'm faster. I put 2 rounds in his chest before he got his gun level. He died on my porch. And Frank blamed you. Frank's son was a bully and a drunk, but he was still his son. I understand that. But understanding doesn't change the fact that he wants me dead. And he's going to keep coming until one of us is in the ground. Lydia set down her cup. Then we make sure it's not you. Ronan looked at her, and something in his eyes cracked open. Vulnerability, gratitude, maybe even hope. I don't deserve your loyalty, he said quietly. I'm not giving it because you deserve it. I'm giving it because I choose to. He reached across the table, slowly, carefully, like he was afraid she'd pull away, and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. Thank you, he said. It was the simplest thing. But coming from him, it felt like everything. They sat like that for a while, hands touching, coffee going cold, the lamp burning low. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Lydia felt something other than fear or determination. She felt like she might actually survive this. The attack came 4 nights later. Lydia woke to the sound of breaking glass. For a second, she thought she'd dreamed it. Then she heard boots on the porch, and her blood went ice cold. She grabbed the revolver and rolled out of bed. The house was dark, but through her window she could see shapes moving outside, 3, maybe 4 men. Ronan, she shouted. His door slammed open. He was already dressed, rifle in hand. Stay in your room, he said. Like hell! The front door exploded inward. 2 men rushed through, and Ronan fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. 1 man went down screaming. The other dove behind the table. Lydia heard a window shatter in her room. She spun and saw a man climbing through, silhouetted against the moonlight. She didn't think. Just raised the revolver and fired. The man jerked and fell backward out the window. She heard him hit the ground outside, cursing. More shots from the main room, breaking furniture, Ronan shouting something she couldn't make out. Then a body crashed against her door, splintering it partway open. One of Morrison's men stumbled through, blood running down his face. He saw her and lunged. Lydia fired again. Missed. The man grabbed her wrist, slammed her hand against the wall. The revolver fell. He was bigger, stronger, and his breath stank of whiskey and rage. You're coming with us, bitch. A gunshot. The man's head snapped back and he collapsed. Behind him stood Ronan, rifle smoking, his face spattered with blood that wasn't his own. You hurt? He asked. No. Her voice shook. No, I'm fine. Good. Stay behind me. They moved into the main room together. 2 men were down, 1 dead, 1 groaning and clutching his leg. The table was overturned. Lamp oil was spreading across the floor, the lamp itself shattered. Outside she could hear horses, shouting, then hoofbeats fading into the distance. Ronan moved to the broken door and looked out. After a moment, he lowered his rifle. They're gone. For now. Lydia looked around at the carnage. Blood on the floor, bullet holes in the walls, the acrid smell of gunpowder. 1 man dead, another probably dying. Her hands started shaking, then her whole body. She sank down onto the overturned table and tried to breathe. Ronan knelt in front of her. Lydia, look at me. She looked. His eyes were dark and steady. You did good, he said. You stayed calm. You fought. You're alive. I shot someone. You defended yourself. That's different. Is it? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, Yeah, it is. Trust me on that. The man with the leg wound was still groaning. Ronan stood and walked over to him. Who sent you? He asked. The man spat blood. Go to hell. Ronan pressed his boot against the wounded leg. The man screamed. Who sent you? Morrison. Morrison sent us. Tears were streaming down the man's face. Said to grab your wife, bring her back. Said you'd follow. How many more are coming? I don't know. I swear I don't know. We were just supposed to grab her and go. Ronan stepped back. Get out of here. Tell Morrison if he wants me, he comes himself. No more hired guns. No more threats. Just him and me. The man scrambled up, whimpering, and limped out the door. They heard him stumble down the steps. heard a horse whinny, heard hoofbeats fading. Ronan turned to Lydia. We need to leave, tonight. If Morrison sent 4 men, he'll send more. Leave? And go where? Town. Sheriff's office. Make him protect you whether he wants to or not. What about you? I'm going to Morrison's ranch. I'm going to end this. Lydia stood up. Not alone, you're not. This isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't. He threatened me. He sent men into our home. She picked up her revolver from where it had fallen. I'm not hiding in town while you go get yourself killed. Lydia, no. She met his eyes. We're in this together. You said it yourself. We're partners, so we end it together or not at all. He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. All right, together. They loaded the wagon in the dark, guns, ammunition, supplies. The dead man they left where he'd fallen. No time for anything else. Ronan hitched up the horse, and they pulled out onto the road heading south. Not toward town, toward Morrison's ranch. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown dice. Lydia sat beside Ronan, the rifle across her lap, her heart hammering but her hands steady. When we get there, Ronan said, stay behind me. Don't take chances. If things go wrong, you run. Understand? No. He glanced at her. No? I'm not running anymore. Not from Morrison, not from anyone. She checked the rifle's load. Whatever happens, we face it. Something like pride crossed his face. You're tougher than I gave you credit for. You're not the only one who's survived hell. They drove on. The road wound through dark forest, then opened onto prairie. In the distance, Lydia could see lights. Morrison's ranch, a sprawling compound, bigger than anything she'd imagined. That's where Frank lives, Ronan said. Main house in the center, bunkhouses on either side. He's got maybe a dozen men on payroll. And we're just going to ride up to the front door? More or less. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? She didn't. They approached slowly, the wagon creaking in the silence. As they got closer, men emerged from the shadows, ranch hands with rifles surrounding them. Ronan pulled the wagon to a stop. A door opened in the main house, spilling lamplight. Frank Morrison stepped out onto the porch. Even from this distance, Lydia could see the satisfaction on his face. Ronan Cade, he called. You're either very brave or very stupid, coming here. Ronan climbed down from the wagon. Lydia followed, staying close. Your men failed, Frank. Thought you should know. Morrison's smile faded. What? The 4 you sent to grab my wife. 2 are dead, 1's crippled, and the 4th ran like a coward. So whatever you were planning, it's over. Frank's face darkened. You're lying. Come check my house if you don't believe me. There's blood all over the floor. Morrison descended the porch steps. His men shifted, rifles coming up. The air was electric with violence waiting to happen. You killed my men? They broke into my home. They tried to kidnap my wife. What did you think would happen? I think you're a murderer who deserves to hang. Morrison's hand drifted toward his belt. And I think tonight's the night someone finally makes that happen. Ronan's hand moved to his gun. Try it. Time seemed to slow. Lydia could hear her own heartbeat, could see the tension in every man's shoulders. One wrong move, and everyone would start shooting. Then a voice cut through the night. Nobody moves! Sheriff Blake rode into the circle of light, his horse breathing hard. Behind him were 3 deputized men, all armed. What the hell are you doing here, Blake? Morrison demanded. My job. Blake dismounted, his face set. Mrs. Yates came to me an hour ago, said she saw Morrison's men riding out armed and talking about grabbing someone. I put 2 and 2 together. He looked at Ronan, then at Morrison. This ends now. Frank, you've been pushing this vendetta for 9 months. It stops tonight, or I arrest you for conspiracy to kidnap. Morrison's face went purple. You can't. I can and I will. Your son drew first. Every witness said so. Ronan defended himself legally. If you can't accept that, it's your problem, not the law's. The law, Morrison spat. You've been protecting him this whole time. I've been trying to keep the peace, but sending armed men to kidnap a woman? That's a line you don't cross. Blake turned to his deputies. Anyone here who participated in tonight's attack, step forward now. You'll face charges, but it'll go easier than if I have to hunt you down. Nobody moved. Blake sighed. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. He looked at Morrison. You've got 24 hours to send those men to my office to surrender, or I'm coming back with warrants. And Frank, if anything happens to Ronan or his wife, I'm coming for you first. Understood? Morrison's hands were shaking with rage, but he nodded. Blake mounted his horse. Ronan, Lydia, you're coming back to town with me. I'll put you up at the hotel until this settles. I'm not leaving my ranch, Ronan said. Your ranch is a crime scene and a target. You're coming to town where I can protect you both. Ronan looked like he wanted to argue. Then Lydia touched his arm. He's right, she said quietly. We can't fight them all. Ronan's jaw worked. Finally, he nodded. They climbed back into the wagon and followed Blake toward town, leaving Morrison standing in his yard, surrounded by his men, his face twisted with impotent fury. As they rode away, Lydia looked back once. Morrison was still watching them, and even from this distance she could feel the weight of his hatred. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they'd survived the night, together, and that counted for something. The hotel room was small and cold, with wallpaper peeling in the corners and a window that looked out onto the main street. Lydia sat on the edge of the narrow bed while Ronan paced, his boots wearing a track in the thin carpet. We shouldn't be here, he said for the third time. We're here because the alternative was getting killed in our sleep. Lydia pulled the thin blanket around her shoulders. Blake's right. We can't defend the ranch against a dozen armed men. So we just hide. Wait for Morrison to make his next move? We let the law handle it. Ronan laughed, sharp and bitter. The law. Blake only showed up because Mrs. Yates shamed him into it. You think he's going to keep us safe once Morrison starts applying pressure? Once Morrison reminds him who owns half this town? Lydia didn't have an answer for that. She looked down at her hands. They were still shaking, had been since the shooting. She could still see the man climbing through her window, could still feel the revolver's kick as she fired. I killed someone tonight, she said quietly. Ronan stopped pacing. You wounded him. I'm the one who killed. Does that make it better? No, but it makes it mine to carry, not yours. She looked up at him. His face was drawn, exhausted. There was blood on his collar, dried now, dark brown. She wondered if he even noticed. How do you live with it? She asked. Knowing you've taken lives? He was quiet for a long time. Then he crossed to the window and stared out at the dark street. Some days I don't, he said finally. Some days I wake up and I can still see their faces. The men I killed in the war, Jack Morrison, the ones tonight. I tell myself it was necessary, that it was them or me. It doesn't always help. But you keep going. What else is there to do? Can't undo it. Can't bring them back. He turned to face her. You just learn to live with the weight. Gets a little easier every day. Then something happens and it's heavy again. Lydia nodded. She understood that. Had understood it since her parents died, since she'd stood in that tenement room and felt the crushing weight of being alone. I don't regret it, she said. Shooting that man. He was going to take me, hurt me. I'd do it again. Good. That means you'll survive this. He moved to the door, checked the lock for the fourth time. Then he pulled the room's single chair over and positioned it facing the door. He sat down, rifle across his lap. You should sleep, he said. What about you? I'll keep watch. Ronan, you need rest too. I'll rest when this is over. Lydia wanted to argue, but she could see it wouldn't do any good. She lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, the revolver under her pillow. Through heavy eyelids, she watched Ronan sitting motionless in the chair, silhouetted against the window. She didn't think she'd sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under anyway. When she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through the window, and Ronan was exactly where she'd left him. He looked like he hadn't moved all night. Did you sleep at all? She asked. Some. You're lying. His mouth twitched. Yeah. There was a knock at the door. They both tensed. Ronan stood, rifle ready. Who is it? Blake. Ronan opened the door. The sheriff stood there with a tray of food, bread, coffee, some kind of stew. Figured you'd be hungry, Blake said. Mind if I come in? Ronan stepped aside. Blake set the tray on the small table and turned to face them. Morrison's men started coming in an hour ago. 3 so far, all confessing to the attack. I've got them in cells. 3 out of how many? Ronan asked. Can't say for sure. Could have been 4, could have been 6. But 3's enough to make charges stick. Blake poured himself a cup of coffee. Here's the problem, though. Morrison's got lawyers. Good ones. They're already claiming his men acted without orders, that he had no knowledge of the attack. That's horseshit, Ronan said. Maybe, but proving it's another matter. Blake sat down heavily. What I need from you is a statement. Everything that happened in order. Mrs. Cade, you too. We put it in writing, get it witnessed, and it becomes official record. Lydia glanced at Ronan. He nodded. All right, she said. They spent the next hour going through every detail. Blake took notes in careful handwriting, stopping them occasionally to clarify a point. When they finished, he had them both sign the statement. This helps, he said. But it's not over. Morrison's still out there, still angry. My advice? Stay in town a few more days, let things cool down. And then what? Ronan asked. Go back to the ranch and wait for the next attack? Blake sighed. I don't have a good answer for you, Ronan. Morrison's within his rights to hate you. Can't arrest a man for his feelings. Best I can do is make sure he knows I'm watching. After Blake left, Lydia and Ronan ate in silence. The food was plain but warm, and Lydia was surprised by how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten since before the attack. We can't stay here forever, Ronan said. I know. And we can't go back to the ranch, not yet. Morrison's just waiting for another opportunity. Lydia set down her coffee. So what do we do? Ronan was quiet, thinking. Then he said, we force his hand. Make him come after me directly instead of through you. That's insane. It's the only way this ends. As long as he thinks he can get to me through you, you're in danger. But if I make it clear that I'm the only target, he'll focus on me. And then you'll be dead. Maybe. Maybe not. He looked at her. But you'll be safe. That matters more. Lydia's chest tightened. Not to me, it doesn't. The words came out harder than she intended. Ronan blinked, surprised. What? I'm not going to stand by while you sacrifice yourself. We're in this together. Remember? You said it yourself. That was before, but before what? Before I proved I could handle myself? Before I shot a man to protect us both? She stood up. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting, Ronan. I'm your wife, your partner. And I'm not letting you throw your life away. He stared at her, and something in his expression cracked open. Raw emotion she'd never seen before. I don't want you to die because of me, he said quietly. Then don't die because of me either. They stood there, locked in that moment. Outside, the town was waking up. Voices on the street, wagon wheels creaking, a dog barking. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt very far away. Finally, Ronan nodded. All right, we find another way. The door burst open. They both spun, Ronan raising his rifle. But it was just Mrs. Yates, breathing hard, her face flushed. You need to come, she gasped. Right now. It's Morrison. He's in the street with a gun. They ran. Outside, a crowd had gathered in front of the sheriff's office. Lydia pushed through, Ronan right behind her, and saw Frank Morrison standing in the middle of the street. He was alone, no men backing him up, but he had a revolver in his hand and murder in his eyes. Cade, he shouted, get out here. Get! Blake was on the boardwalk, hands raised, placating. Frank, put the gun down. This isn't the way. Shut up, Blake. This is between me and him. Morrison's voice carried across the street. Ronan Cade, you killed my boy. You've been hiding behind the law long enough. Come face me like a man. Ronan started forward. Lydia grabbed his arm. Don't, she said. I have to. This is what he wants, a public confrontation. If I don't face him, he'll keep coming. He'll kill you. Ronan looked down at her and his eyes were sad but certain. Maybe. But at least it'll be over. He pulled away gently and stepped into the street. The crowd went silent. Morrison turned to face him, and Lydia could see the rage and grief twisting his features. This wasn't just about territory or pride. This was about a father who'd lost his son and couldn't let go. You took everything from me, Morrison said. His voice shook. Jack was all I had, my only boy, and you gunned him down like he was nothing. He drew on me first, Ronan said quietly. I didn't want to kill him, Frank, but I wasn't going to die for him either. He was 23 years old. I know, and I'm sorry for that. but it doesn't change what happened. Morrison's hand tightened on the gun. Sorry doesn't bring him back. No, it doesn't. They stood 30 feet apart, two men carved hollow by violence and loss. The whole town watched, holding its breath. Frank, Ronan's voice was steady. You can shoot me right now. Probably get away with it too, claiming I drew first, but it won't make your grief any less. Won't bring Jack back. Won't give you peace. It'll give me justice. Will it? Or will it just make you a killer too? Morrison's face twisted. His gun hand wavered. For a moment, Lydia thought he might lower it, thought this might end without more blood. Then Morrison raised the gun and fired. Ronan moved. He was fast, faster than anyone had a right to be. He threw himself sideways as Morrison's shot went wide. His own gun cleared leather in a blur of motion. But he didn't fire. Morrison fired again. Missed again. He was shaking too hard, his grief making him sloppy. Ronan could have killed him. Lydia saw it in the way he held his gun, perfectly steady, perfectly aimed. One shot, and Frank Morrison would be dead. But Ronan didn't take it. Drop it, Frank, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Don't make me kill you too. Morrison fired a third time. The shot went wild, hitting the dirt. Blake rushed forward, two deputies behind him. They grabbed Morrison, wrestled the gun from his hand. He fought them, screaming obscenities, but they got him down and cuffed. You're under arrest, Blake said. Attempted murder in front of 30 witnesses. Morrison was still screaming as they dragged him toward the jail. This isn't over, Cade, you hear me? This isn't over. But it was. Lydia could see it in the way the crowd looked at Ronan, no longer with fear but with something like respect. He'd had every right to kill Morrison. Everyone had seen it, but he'd chosen not to. Ronan holstered his gun and walked back to where Lydia stood. You all right? He asked. She couldn't speak, just nodded. He looked down at her and something in his eyes was different, lighter, like a weight had finally lifted. Come on, he said. Let's go home. The ranch felt different when they returned 3 days later. The broken door had been repaired. Blake had sent men to do it, along with a note apologizing for doubting Ronan. The blood had been scrubbed from the floors. The bullet holes were still there, but somehow they felt less ominous now. Morrison was in jail awaiting trial. His lawyers were scrambling, but with 3 of his men confessing and 30 witnesses to the street shooting, there wasn't much they could do. Blake had told Ronan it would likely end with Morrison losing his ranch and spending years in prison. It was over. Really over. Lydia stood in the doorway of the main room and looked around. This place had been a refuge and a battleground. Now it could be something else. Something better. What are you thinking? Ronan asked. He was unloading supplies from the wagon, moving more easily now that the constant threat had lifted. I'm thinking this place could use some work. What kind of work? Paint, curtains, maybe some furniture that isn't purely functional. She turned to him. Make it feel like a home instead of a fortress. Ronan set down a sack of flour and looked at her. You planning to stay then? Are you planning to kick me out? No, but you've got options now. Morrison's done. You could go back east if you wanted. Start over. Lydia walked over to him. I could, but I don't want to. Why not? She thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, woven from desperation and necessity, and something else she was only beginning to understand. Because I like it here, she said finally. I like the work. I like the quiet. I like... She hesitated. I like you. Ronan went very still. You don't have to say that. I know, I'm saying it because it's true. She met his eyes. You're a good man, Ronan Cade. You're hard, and you're rough around the edges, and you've got ghosts that wake you up screaming, but you're good, and I'd rather be here with you than anywhere else. He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Then slowly, he reached out and took her hand. I'm not easy to live with, he said. Neither am I. The nightmares won't stop. Then I'll be here when you wake up. His grip tightened. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Then be what you are. I'll do the same. We'll figure out the rest. For a long moment, they just stood there, hands clasped, surrounded by the evidence of everything they'd survived. Then Ronan pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or practiced. It was desperate and honest and real. His hands were rough, His mouth tasted like coffee, and Lydia felt something inside her chest crack open and let light in. When they pulled apart, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay. I'm not going anywhere." That night, for the first time, Lydia left her door open. And when the nightmares came for Ronan, and they did come, they always did, she was there to pull him back from them. The weeks that followed were quieter. They fell into new rhythms, working the ranch together, eating meals across from each other, talking in the evenings by the stove. Slowly, the separate quarters arrangement faded. Ronan started sleeping in Lydia's room, or she in his. It didn't matter which. What mattered was that they weren't alone anymore. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. Lydia planted a garden beside the house. Vegetables and herbs, practical things. But she also planted flowers, just because she wanted to see something beautiful. Ronan watched her work with quiet amusement. "Flowers don't do much good out here." "They do plenty of good. They're pretty." "Pretty doesn't feed cattle." "No, but it feeds something else." He didn't argue. One morning in late April, Lydia woke feeling strange. Her stomach was unsettled, and she felt lightheaded. She dismissed it as something she ate and went about her work. But it kept happening. Every morning for a week. Ronan noticed. "You all right?" "Fine. Just tired." "You're never tired." She was about to deny it again when realization hit her like cold water. She counted back weeks, calculating dates. Her last monthly had been before the attack, before everything. She stared at Ronan, and he must have seen something in her face because he set down the harness he was mending. "What is it?" "I think—" She had to say it out loud to make it real. "I think I'm pregnant." The silence stretched. Ronan's expression was unreadable. "You're sure?" he asked finally. "No, but all the signs—" She pressed a hand to her stomach. "I think so." Ronan stood, crossed to her, took her hands in his. "How do you feel about that?" Lydia had to think. A baby. A child. Here in this hard place, with this hard man. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something like hope. "I feel good," she said. "Scared, but good." A smile broke across Ronan's face, genuine and unguarded. She'd never seen him smile like that. "We're having a baby," he said, like he was testing the words. "Looks like it." He laughed. Actually laughed. Then he picked her up and spun her around, and Lydia found herself laughing too. When he set her down, his eyes were bright. "I'm going to be a father." "You're going to be a father," she confirmed. "I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious. And maybe she was. Maybe they both were. The news changed something in Ronan. He started making plans, expanding the house, building a proper nursery, talking about hiring hands to help with the work, so Lydia wouldn't have to do as much. He became almost compulsive about it, like he could build them into safety through sheer determination. One evening, Lydia found him in what would become the nursery, measuring boards for a cradle. "You're worrying," she said. "I'm planning." "You're worrying." He set down the measuring tape. "What if I'm not good at this? What if I can't protect them? What if—" "Ronan," she crossed to him, took his face in her hands. "You're going to be a good father. I know it." "How can you know that?" "Because you care enough to be scared. Bad fathers don't worry." He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. "I want to give them everything I didn't have. Safety, stability, a father who isn't broken." "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." "Am I?" "Yes. I see it every day. The way you smile more now, the way the nightmares are getting less frequent, the way you talk about the future instead of just surviving." She kissed him gently. "You're becoming the man you were supposed to be, before the war, before all the violence, and our child is going to know that man, not the ghost you were." Ronan pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. She felt him shake slightly and realized he was crying. "Thank you," he whispered, "for staying, for believing in me, for giving me a reason to be better." "You gave me a reason too." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the half-finished nursery, while outside the sun set over mountains that had seen too much hardship and were finally seeing hope. Summer came. Lydia's belly grew. Ronan hired 2 ranch hands, young men from town who'd heard about the Morrison situation and respected how Ronan had handled it. The ranch began to thrive in ways it never had before. The cattle multiplied. The crops grew. Neighbors who'd once avoided Ronan started stopping by, tentative at first, then more frequently. Blake came out one afternoon with news. Morrison had been sentenced to 12 years. His ranch was being sold to pay debts and legal fees. The threat was truly, permanently over. "How do you feel?" Blake asked Ronan. Ronan looked around at the ranch, the new barn, the garden, Lydia hanging laundry and laughing at something one of the hands had said. "I feel free," he said. In September, on a clear morning with the first hints of autumn in the air, Lydia went into labor. It was hard and frightening and longer than either of them expected. Ronan stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, talking her through it, looking more terrified than he'd ever looked facing armed men. When their son finally came, red-faced and screaming and perfect, Ronan took him with shaking hands and stared down at the tiny life they'd created. "He's so small," he whispered. "He'll grow," Lydia said. She was exhausted but smiling. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at this new life, Lydia knew. "Thomas," she said, "after your friend, the one who died at Gettysburg." Ronan's eyes filled with tears. "You sure?" "I'm sure. Let something good carry his name forward." Ronan kissed her forehead, then his son's. "Thomas Cade, welcome to the world, son." The baby quieted at his father's voice, and Lydia watched Ronan hold him. This hard man who'd killed and suffered and survived, now cradling new life with infinite gentleness. This was the transformation, not instant, not complete, but real. The gunman becoming a father, the survivor becoming a builder, the isolated man becoming part of something larger than himself. And Lydia, who'd come west to escape death, had instead found life. The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. Lydia learned that motherhood was nothing like she'd imagined. Harder, messier, more exhausting than any work she'd done on the ranch. But it was also better. Every smile, every small sound, every time Thomas wrapped his tiny fingers around hers felt like proof that something good could grow in hard soil. Ronan was a revelation as a father. The man who'd been so careful with his emotions, so guarded, became completely undone by his son. He'd hold Thomas for hours, talking to him in a low murmur about the ranch, about the cattle, about things that made no sense to an infant but seemed to matter to Ronan. "You're telling him about fence repair," Lydia said one evening, watching from the doorway. Ronan looked up from where he sat in the rocking chair they'd built together. Thomas was asleep against his chest. "He needs to know these things eventually. He's 4 months old. Never too early to start learning." But Ronan was smiling as he said it. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less frequently now. And when they did, Ronan would slip out of bed quietly and go sit with Thomas, watching the baby sleep until whatever demons had visited him faded back into memory. One night, Lydia found him there at 3 a.m, just sitting in the dark nursery. "Bad one?" she asked softly. "Yeah." She sat on the floor beside his chair. They'd learned they didn't always need words. Sometimes presence was enough. After a while, Ronan spoke. "I used to think the war ruined me, made me into something that couldn't be fixed. And now? Now I think maybe it just broke me down so I could be built into something different." He looked down at Thomas. "Something better. You were always good, Ronan. You just couldn't see it. I killed a lot of men, Lydia. I know, and you'll carry that forever. But that's not all you are." She reached up and took his hand. "You're also the man who spared Frank Morrison when you could have killed him. The man who built a cradle with his own hands. The man who gets up at 3 a.m. to make sure his son is breathing." Ronan's grip tightened. "Some days I still don't feel like I deserve this. Any of this. Deserving's got nothing to do with it. We don't get what we deserve. We get what we build. And we built this together." He pulled her up into his lap, careful not to wake Thomas, and kissed her forehead. "I love you. Don't think I've said that enough. You say it every day, just not always with words." They sat like that until dawn, A family carved out of desperation and violence and choice. Not perfect, but real. By the time Thomas turned 1, the ranch had grown beyond anything Ronan had managed alone. They had 6 hands working full-time now, and the herd had expanded to nearly 400 head. Word had spread that Ronan Cade was a fair employer who paid on time and didn't tolerate troublemakers. Good men started seeking him out. The town's attitude had shifted too. People who'd once crossed the street to avoid Ronan now nodded greetings. Shop owners made conversation. When Lydia brought Thomas into town, women cooed over him and asked her advice about everything from teething to preserving vegetables. "You're one of us now," Mrs. Yates told her one afternoon outside the general store. "Both of you. Took folks a while to see past old stories, but they see it now." "See what?" "That Ronan's not the monster they made him out to be. That he's just a man trying to do right by his family." She smiled. "You changed him, dear. Or maybe you just gave him reason to change himself." Lydia thought about that on the ride home. Had she changed Ronan? Or had he changed himself? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe change was always a collaboration. You couldn't do it alone, but nobody could do it for you either. That evening, she found Ronan in the barn working on a new project. He'd been secretive about it for weeks, disappearing after dinner to work by lamplight. "Can I see yet?" she asked. He straightened up, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Almost done. Come here." She walked over and stopped. It was a rocking horse, beautifully carved, painted in soft colors, with a mane made from real horsehair. "Ronan, this is for Thomas. Figured he's getting old enough to start learning about horses, even if it's just pretend ones." He ran his hand over the smooth wood. "My father made me one when I was small, before everything went bad. It's one of the only good memories I have from back then." Lydia touched the rocking horse, feeling the care that had gone into every curve. "He's going to love it." "I hope so." Ronan looked at her. "I want to give him better memories than I had. I want him to grow up knowing his father loves him, that he's safe, that the world doesn't have to be brutal." "You're already giving him that." "Am I? Because some days I look at him and I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up, that I'm going to pass on all my damage." Lydia took his face in her hands. "Listen to me. The fact that you worry about that means you won't. Bad fathers don't question themselves. They just do damage and move on. You're not that man." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you better than you know yourself sometimes." She kissed him. "And because I see the way Thomas looks at you, like you hung the moon. That kind of love doesn't come from fear. It comes from safety." Ronan pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. You opened the door when I showed up desperate and scared. You gave me a chance when you could have sent me back. That's what you did." They stood like that for a while, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and hay and the quiet sounds of evening. Through the barn door, they could see the house with its warm windows, could hear one of the hands singing as he worked. This was home now, not just a place to survive, but a place to live. The next test came in Thomas's second summer. Drought hit the territory hard, turning the grass brown and drying up the smaller creeks. Cattle were dying across the region. Ranchers were selling off stock at a loss just to keep their remaining animals fed. Ronan worked 18-hour days trying to keep the herd alive. He dug new wells, hauled water from the river, moved cattle to higher pastures where there was still some green. The hands worked themselves ragged alongside him. Lydia did what she could, managing the household, keeping everyone fed, caring for Thomas while watching her husband slowly wear himself down to nothing. One night, Ronan came in late, covered in dirt and exhausted. He barely made it through dinner before his head started nodding. "Go to bed," Lydia said. "Can't. Need to check the north well, make sure it's still producing. I'll send Martin. You need sleep." "Lydia." "Ronan Cade, you're no good to anyone dead on your feet. Go to bed." He was too tired to argue. She got him into bed still half-dressed, pulled off his boots, covered him with a sheet. He was asleep before she left the room. The drought broke 3 weeks later with storms that came in like punishment. Lightning set fire to the dry grass, and they spent 2 days fighting flames alongside every ranch in the territory. When it was over, Ronan had lost maybe 50 head, far fewer than most. But the cost showed on him. He'd pushed too hard for too long, and something in him had strained past breaking. Lydia found him one morning sitting on the porch, just staring out at nothing. Thomas was playing at his feet, but Ronan didn't seem to see him. Ronan? No response. She sat down beside him. Talk to me. I'm tired, Lydia. Bone tired. The kind that sleep doesn't fix. I know. I keep thinking, all this work, all this building. What's the point? The land doesn't care. It'll take everything back the moment you stop fighting. This was dangerous ground. She'd seen him retreat into himself before, but never quite like this. The point, she said carefully, is that we don't do it for the land. We do it for each other, for Thomas, for the life we're building. And if that's not enough, if I can't keep protecting it, then we adapt. We survive. We've done it before. She took his hand. But you don't have to do it alone. You've got hands who'll help. You've got neighbors who respect you now. You've got me. What if I fail? Then we fail together and start over. But Ronan, you're not failing. You saved the herd. You kept everyone safe. That's not failure. He finally looked at her. When did you get so strong? I learned from you. I'm not strong. I'm barely holding together. That's what strong looks like. It's not never breaking. It's breaking and getting back up anyway. Thomas crawled over and pulled himself up using Ronan's leg. He looked up at his father with bright eyes and said, Da! It was his first word. Ronan's face crumpled. He picked up Thomas and held him close, and Lydia saw tears running down his cheeks. Da, Thomas said again, pleased with himself. Yeah, son, I'm your Da. Ronan's voice was wrecked. And I'm going to do better, I promise. After that, something shifted. Ronan learned to delegate more, to trust his hands with responsibilities he'd always carried alone. He started taking Sundays off to spend with family. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes eased. One evening, they were sitting on the porch watching Thomas chase chickens when Ronan said, I've been thinking. About? Expanding, not the herd, we're at capacity, but the house. Add another bedroom, maybe two, a real dining room. Planning for more children? He looked at her. If you want them. Lydia thought about it. Pregnancy had been hard, labor harder. But watching Thomas grow, seeing Ronan as a father, she wanted that again. I want them, she said. Good. Because I want a daughter, someone to balance out all this male energy around here. You can't order daughters like supplies, Ronan. Can't I? He was smiling now, that rare, full smile that still caught her off guard. Their daughter arrived the following spring, a difficult birth that scared them both. But she came out screaming and healthy, with Lydia's dark hair and Ronan's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah, after Lydia's mother. Ronan held her with the same wonder he'd shown with Thomas, but there was something different too. A gentleness that went even deeper. She's perfect, he whispered. She's screaming, Lydia pointed out. Sarah had impressive lungs. Perfect, Ronan repeated firmly. Thomas, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister. He insisted on helping with everything, bringing diapers, singing to her, telling her long rambling stories that made no sense. Watching her 2 children together, Lydia felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd fought for. This was what all the hardship had been building toward. But life wasn't done testing them yet. When Sarah was 6 months old, a man rode up to the ranch. He was well-dressed, carrying legal papers. Lydia's stomach dropped when she saw him. Ronan met him in the yard. Help you? Mr. Cade? I'm Leonard Price, attorney from Helena. I'm here about Frank Morrison. Lydia, watching from the porch with Sarah in her arms, saw Ronan's shoulders tense. Morrison's in prison. What about him? He's dying. Consumption. The doctors give him maybe 3 months. Price shifted his weight. He's asked to see you. Says he has things he needs to say before he goes. I've got nothing to say to him. I understand, but he's asking, begging, actually. Says he can't die with this weight on him. Ronan stood there for a long moment. Then he said, I'll think about it. After Price left, Ronan came up to the porch. He looked at Lydia. You don't have to go, she said. I know. He tried to kill you, sent men after me. You owe him nothing. I know that too. He sat down heavily. But I keep thinking, he lost his son. That broke him, and now he's dying alone in a cell. There's something about that that feels wrong. You're too good, Ronan Cade. No, but maybe I'm trying to be. He went the next week. Lydia wanted to go with him, but Sarah was too young for the journey and Thomas too energetic. So she watched him ride away with Price and tried not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. Ronan was gone 3 days. When he came back, he looked exhausted, but somehow lighter. "What happened?" Lydia asked. They sat on the porch after the children were asleep. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered overhead. "I almost didn't go in," Ronan said. "Stood outside his cell for 10 minutes, just trying to make myself walk through that door." "But you did." "Yeah, and he looked small, shrunken. Not the man who'd threatened us, just a sick old man with regrets." "What did he say?" Ronan was quiet for a moment. He apologized, said he'd been wrong, that grief had made him crazy. Said he'd spent 2 years in that cell thinking about everything he'd done, everyone he'd hurt. He asked if I could forgive him. And? I told him I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I told him I understood why he'd done it. That if someone had killed Thomas, I'd probably have done the same. Ronan looked at her. Then he said something that hit me hard. "What?" He said, "Don't let rage eat your life like it ate mine. You've got a family, Cade, a good woman, beautiful children. Don't waste a single day on anger or guilt. Just live. That's all any of us should have been doing all along." Lydia felt tears sting her eyes. "That's good advice." "Yeah, from a man who learned it too late." Ronan took her hand. "He died 3 days later. Price sent word. But before he went, he changed his will, left what little money he had to Thomas and Sarah. Said it was the only way he could think to make amends." "That's unexpected." "Morrison was a lot of things, but he wasn't all bad. Just broken by loss." Ronan looked up at the stars. "Made me think about all the ways I could have ended up like him." "Would have, probably, if you hadn't stayed. You would have found your way." "I don't think so. I think I needed someone to believe in me before I could believe in myself." They sat in silence for a while. Then Lydia said, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think we saved each other. I was starving and desperate. You were isolated and haunted. Neither of us would have made it alone, but together we built something neither of us could have built separately." Ronan turned to her, and in the starlight she could see tears on his cheeks. "I love you," he said. "I don't say it enough, but I do. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." "You're the best thing that happened to me, too." They stayed out there until the cold drove them inside, talking about Morrison and forgiveness and the strange paths that led people to redemption or ruin. The years that followed were full and rich and sometimes hard. They had 2 more children, another son named Michael after Ronan's fallen friend, and a second daughter they called Grace. The ranch prospered. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books as much as he loved horses. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing things she shouldn't. Michael was quiet and gentle. Grace was too young yet to show her personality, but Lydia suspected she'd be a handful. Ronan's hair started going gray at the temples. Lydia found her first silver strand and laughed about it. They were getting older, wearing down like everything else in this hard country. But they were doing it together. One evening, when Thomas was 12 and Sarah 10, Lydia found them in the barn with Ronan. He was teaching them to repair saddles, his big hands guiding their smaller ones. "See, you want the stitches tight, but not so tight they'll break under stress," he was saying. "Like when you stitched up your side that time?" Thomas asked. Ronan glanced at Lydia. She'd told the children stories about their early days, edited versions, but honest about the hardship. "Something like that," Ronan said. "Were you scared?" Sarah asked. She was always the direct one. "Terrified. Thought I might die before your mother finished." "But Ma saved you," Thomas said confidently. "Yeah, she did. She saved me more times than I can count." After the children went to bed, Ronan and Lydia walked out to look at the garden. It had grown over the years, vegetables and herbs, but also roses that Lydia had planted, and a small apple orchard that was finally producing fruit. "Remember when you said flowers don't do much good out here?" Lydia asked. "I was wrong. They do plenty." He put his arm around her. "You were right about a lot of things." "Not everything. Most things." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "The children are going to inherit this place someday. This ranch, this land, everything we've built. I want them to know the whole story, not just the good parts." "Why?" "Because the good parts don't mean as much without the hard parts. They need to know we weren't perfect, that we made mistakes, that we hurt people and were hurt, that we were terrified half the time. They need to know we survived anyway. Lydia thought about that. You want to tell them about the war? About Morrison? About all of it? When they're old enough to understand, I want them to know that you don't have to be perfect to build something good. You just have to keep trying. That's wise. I learned it from you. They stood there in the garden, surrounded by evidence of years of work and care. The house behind them glowed with lamplight. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. Beyond the house, the ranch stretched out, pastures and cattle and honest labor. It wasn't perfect. The land was still hard. Money was sometimes tight. The children fought and cried and tested every boundary. Ronan still had nightmares, though they were gentle now, more memory than torment. Lydia still had days where the weight of everything felt too heavy, but they had each other, and they had this life they'd built from nothing but need and determination and a kind of stubborn hope. You know what the best part is? Lydia asked. What? We chose this every day. We choose it. We could have given up 100 times. Could have let the hardship win. But we didn't. No, we didn't. Thomas graduated from school 3 years later, top of his small class. He announced he wanted to be a lawyer, wanted to make sure people like his parents got fair treatment under the law. Ronan was so proud he couldn't speak for a full minute. Sarah declared she was going to run the ranch someday, that she'd make it the biggest and best in the territory. Ronan didn't doubt it. Michael said he wanted to be a veterinarian. He spent hours doctoring sick calves and injured horses with gentle hands and infinite patience. Grace, now 6, said she was going to be everything. A rancher and a teacher and a mother and maybe the president. Nobody told her she couldn't. By the time Ronan turned 50, his hair was more gray than dark, and his joints ached on cold mornings. Lydia had lines around her eyes and her hands were rough from years of work. They looked like what they were, people who'd lived hard and survived. One morning, Ronan woke before dawn like always, but instead of getting up immediately, he lay there watching Lydia sleep. The early light caught the silver in her hair, the lines in her face that told the story of 2 decades together. She opened her eyes and caught him staring. What? She asked. Just thinking. About? About that day you stepped off the train, scared and skinny and trying so hard to look brave. I was terrified. I know, so was I. He reached over and took her hand. But you stayed. Even when you had every reason to run, you stayed. Where else was I going to go? Anywhere. You had choices. You chose me. Best choice I ever made. Even with everything? The violence, the fear, all the hard years? Especially because of those things. They made us who we are. She moved closer. We're not the same people we were, Ronan. That scared girl and that broken man, they're gone. We grew into something better. You think so? I know so. Look at what we built. Not just the ranch, but the life, the family, the respect. We took nothing and made it into everything. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and full of 20 years of love earned in hard increments. Later that day, the whole family gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition they'd maintained for years. The table had been expanded twice to accommodate everyone. The children were getting too big for the space, spilling into the yard with their noise and energy. After dinner, while Lydia was cleaning up, Sarah came to help. Ma, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Coming west? Marrying Da without knowing him? Lydia thought about the question carefully. Sarah was 15 now, old enough for honesty. I was terrified I'd made a terrible mistake, she admitted. Those first weeks I'd lie awake wondering if I'd traded one kind of death for another. But you didn't leave. No. Because even scared, even uncertain, I could see something in your father. Something good buried under all that hardness. And I figured if I was going to take a chance on anything, it might as well be on that. How did you know it would work out? I didn't. That's the thing about taking chances, Sarah. You never know. But you do it anyway because the alternative is never trying, never risking, never living. Sarah nodded slowly. There's a boy in town. He's been asking if he can come calling. Lydia hid her smile. And I'm scared. What if I make the wrong choice? What if it ends badly? It might, but it also might not. and you'll never know if you don't take the risk. She put down the dish she was washing and looked at her daughter. Just make sure you choose for the right reasons. Not desperation or fear, but because you see something good worth investing in. Like you did with Da? Like I did with your father. That night, Lydia found Ronan on the porch. He was sitting in the rocking chair he'd built 20 years ago, the one they'd used for all 4 children. Sarah has a suitor, she said, sitting down beside him. Ronan groaned. Already? She's 15, same age I was when I started working at the hat factory. That's different. Is it? He was quiet for a moment, then he said, What do? We trust her. We raised her to be smart and strong. We trust that she'll make good choices. I don't like this. Neither do I, but it's part of letting them grow up. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over land they'd fought for and bled for and ultimately made home. You know what I realized today? Ronan said. What? We made it. Everything we went through, everything we survived, we actually made it to the other side. We did, and it's better than I ever imagined it could be. Lydia took his hand. We're not done yet. We've got years left. More children to raise, more challenges to face. I know, but whatever comes, we'll handle it the way we've handled everything else. Together? Together. The years continued to roll forward, sometimes easy, often hard, always full. Thomas went off to university to study law. Sarah took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving herself as capable as any man. Michael found his calling with animals. Grace grew into a fierce, brilliant girl who questioned everything. Ronan's nightmares finally stopped completely around his 55th year. He told Lydia one morning, almost surprised, I can't remember the last time I had one, he said. Maybe you finally found peace. Maybe you gave it to me. They stood at the window watching their grandchildren. Thomas had married and had 2 children of his own, playing in the yard where their parents had played, where their grandparents had built something from nothing. You know what I think about sometimes? Lydia asked. What? That girl I was in New York, standing in soup lines, living in a tenement, watching my parents die. If you could have told her what her life would become, she never would have believed it. Would you go back? If you could? Choose differently? Never. Not for anything. She turned to him. This life, this family, you, it's everything I never knew I needed. Same. They grew old together the way they'd grown into everything else, gradually, with grace and humor and occasional complaints about aching joints. The ranch passed to Sarah, who ran it brilliantly. Thomas became a respected attorney fighting for the rights of farmers and small ranchers. Michael opened a veterinary practice. Grace became a teacher, then a school administrator, fierce in her advocacy for education. And Ronan and Lydia settled into a quieter rhythm. They still took walks around the property, moving slower but seeing more. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands, watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their entire journey. One evening, when they were both past 70, Lydia said, Tell me again how we met. She knew the story by heart, but she loved hearing him tell it. You stepped off a train looking like you were about to face a firing squad, Ronan said. His voice was softer now, worn smooth by age. Scared, but trying not to show it. I thought you'd run back to the station before we even made it to the church. I almost did. But you didn't. No, because even terrified, I knew I'd found something real. She squeezed his hand. You know what the hardest part was? Learning to trust that it would last, that the good things wouldn't get taken away. Did you ever learn? Eventually, took about 20 years, but yeah, I learned that some things, when you build them right and fight for them hard enough, they last. We lasted. We did better than last. We thrived. As they sat there in the gathering dark, surrounded by evidence of decades of love and work and choice, Lydia thought about the path that had led her here. From New York tenements to Montana mountains, from desperate survival to purposeful living, from a girl with nothing to a woman who had everything. It hadn't been easy. Nothing about their life had been easy. But it had been real, honest, worth every hard step. No regrets? Ronan asked, like he still needed to hear it. Not a single one. Good. Because I've got a confession. What? That first day when you arrived? I almost sent you back. Told myself you deserved better than a broken man on a hard ranch. Why didn't you? Because you looked at me like I was just a man. Not a killer, not a monster, just a man. And I hadn't felt human in so long that I couldn't let that go. Lydia stood and moved to sit on his lap, something that would have seemed ridiculous for people their age if they'd cared what anyone thought. But they were past that, past everything but each other. We saved each other, she said. You gave me survival. I gave you humanity. And together, we built this. She gestured at the ranch, the house, the life visible through the window where their children and grandchildren were gathering for dinner. Not bad for a mail-order arrangement, Ronan said. Not bad at all. They sat like that until the dinner bell rang, then went inside to join their family. The table was crowded and loud, full of laughter and argument, and the beautiful chaos of people who loved each other. Later, much later, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Ronan and Lydia prepared for bed. They moved slowly, helping each other the way they'd learned to do. You know what I want? Ronan said as they settled in. What? When I go, and I'm not planning to anytime soon, but when I do, I want everyone to know the whole story. Not the sanitized version, the real one. The fear and the violence and the mistakes, but also the love and the choice and the building. Why? Because I want them to know that redemption is real, that you can start from nothing, from worse than nothing, and build something beautiful. That the past doesn't have to define you if you're willing to do the work of becoming something better. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. That's your legacy, Ronan Cade. Not the ranch, not the money. It's that you proved a man can change, that love and work and choice matter more than where you started. We proved it. Together. Together, she agreed. They fell asleep like they'd slept for decades, tangled together, hands clasped, two people who'd found each other in desperation and built everything. The morning Ronan died, he was 82 years old. He went peacefully in his sleep, Lydia beside him. When she woke and found him gone, she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she held his hand and said thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate girl. Thank you for becoming the man you chose to be. Thank you for every day, every choice, every moment that built this life. She cried later at the funeral, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The whole town came. People spoke about Ronan with respect and affection, remembering not the killer he'd been, but the man he'd become. At the wake, Thomas stood to speak. My father wasn't perfect, he said. He made mistakes. He hurt people. He carried wounds from a war that never quite left him. But he spent his life trying to be better than his past. And he succeeded. Not by forgetting what he'd done, but by building something good on top of it. By choosing love over rage, family over isolation, hope over despair. He looked at Lydia, sitting in the front row surrounded by her children. And he couldn't have done any of it without our mother. She's the one who saw him when no one else could. Who stayed when she could have run. Who believed in him until he could believe in himself. Together, they built something none of us will ever forget. Lydia lived another 8 years, long enough to see her youngest great-grandchild born, long enough to tell the story of how she and Ronan met to 5 generations of descendants. She wrote it all down in careful script, the whole truth, so they'd know. When her time came, she was ready. She'd lived a full life, longer than she'd ever expected that girl on the train could have. She'd built something real and lasting. She'd loved and been loved. On her last day, surrounded by family, Sarah held her hand and asked, Ma, was it worth it? All the hardship? Lydia smiled. Every single moment. I wouldn't change a thing. She closed her eyes and thought about Ronan, waiting for her, she hoped, on whatever came next. If there was nothing, that was all right too. They'd had their time. They'd made it count. Her last conscious thought was of that first morning on the ranch, standing in the kitchen with a stranger who would become everything. Scared, but hopeful. Beginning a journey neither of them could have imagined, and thinking, as the world faded, we did it. Against all odds, we built something beautiful. The ranch still stands, 5 generations later. The Cade family still works the land, tells the stories, carries forward the legacy of 2 desperate people who chose each other and changed everything. On the mantel in the main house sits a photograph. Lydia and Ronan in their 50s standing in front of the house they built, surrounded by children. They're holding hands, they're smiling. They look exactly like what they were. Survivors who became builders, strangers who became family, two broken people who made each other whole. The land is still hard, life is still uncertain, but the Cades remember you don't need perfection to build something good. You just need choice, work, love, and the courage to keep going when everything tells you to quit. That's the legacy. Not wealth or property, but proof that transformation is possible, that you can start from nothing and build everything. That the past doesn't have to be destiny if you're willing to write a different future. Lydia and Ronan Cade took a contract marriage born of desperation and turned it into a love story that lasted lifetimes. They proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to move forward anyway. And in the end, that's what survives. Not the hardship they endured or the violence they faced, but the life they built. The family they raised, the love they chose every single day until their last. Some stories end in tragedy, some in triumph. This one ends in both, and neither. It ends the way all real stories end, with ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply by refusing to give up, by choosing each other, by building something that matters. And maybe that's the only ending that ever really mattered.